Thank you, Riddhi. Excited and looking forward to the discussion today. We have observed the constant evolution of automation and its in its current avatar of intelligent automation 2.0 that has emerged with the confluence of generative AI. The technology is helping enterprises unleash their ambitions to leverage the technology for real business outcomes and growth. So let's dive right into the theme for today. For the first question, maybe I can bring you in, Adi. From RPA to intelligent automation, AI has already been introduced over the last few years, right? And how do you see the current avatar of automation really being different from it has been over the past few years?
Yeah, thank you, Prankar. Just a quick intro. Adi Kuruganti, Chief Product Officer at Automation Anywhere. Whereas Prankar mentioned, we created the RPA or robotic process automation category, maybe 10 years ago, and then over time that's been evolving into a broader intelligent automation. So we already have AI-powered products like process discovery, which uses computer vision kind of to understand, help customers map out the processes. Document automation around really IDP or intelligent document processing. So a lot of AI already baked in or built in into our intelligent automation platform, which is what we call the automation success platform. But I do believe with generative AI, and especially what we've seen in the last year, it's a complete accelerator to that shift to broader intelligent automation. And I see it as kind of two-pronged effort. And we're seeing this with our customers. On one end, we're seeing an explosion of use cases, new use cases that can be now automated. If you think about, we have an automation copilot that we actually launched last year before copilots became all the rage as they have this year. But imagine embedding in Salesforce and SAP and others and orchestrating workflows across. Now, by embedding generative AI, you can do things like, content extraction and summarization and really power that end-to-end automation workflow. So we really think about generative AI as infused into that automation use case. Another is document automation. And, we have panelists out here who are focused on IDP. But now we have solutions to automate structured and semi-structured, but with generative AI, now you can process documents like logistics and contracts and a lot of unstructured documents. So one end is really explosion of a lot more processes, use cases that can now be automated. But the other side, which is what creates this flywheel effect, is the ability to quickly create these automations. So we've created automation models using our rich automation metadata. We have over 5,000 customers, and over 70% of those customers are on our multi-tenant public cloud. So using a lot of that, we've created automation models enabling customers to build automations, end-to-end automations much faster. Similar to GitHub, but here this is for building end-to-end automations versus just a JSON file. So I think for us, we are seeing a complete acceleration as far as deployment, automation use cases, and ultimately customer impact. And we'll talk more about use cases in a second, but lots of use cases. We have hundreds of customers doing early POCs and pilots. That's the phase we're in. It's not in production ready. And as an open platform, as some of you might know, we're an early launch partner also with both AWS, Google, and we also partner with Microsoft and some solutions. So we really have an open platform where customers can bring their own LLMs, but also reuse some of the best and brightest vendors out there. So hopefully that was useful.
Sure. Thanks, Adi. I think this was helpful, and I think given where you're coming from, it really covered the last sort of few evolution points in the industry. Brandon, you have been part of the industry for a long time as well, in your multiple roles over the last few years. If you can give your take on how you see intelligent automation 2.0, what is the evolution you're seeing with the current sort of phase of AI that has come in?
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. I think that was a great summary of how some of these areas have evolved, and I really liked generative as a classifier of how to accelerate, how to take some of these existing practices, and from a developer standpoint, shorten the time to value. From a experience standpoint, leveraging some of the summarization capabilities when it comes to direct interaction with customers, or from a testing standpoint, using generative to generate multiple possibilities to test against to try and break your systems. So you have generative coming in as this very broad technology, broad set of capabilities, and it's incumbent upon us and our customers to apply it in the right way. And I think when you talk about where this is in the life cycle and the evolution of generative, right? You won't help but be able to point out some areas where there's immediate tangible value and the use cases match and you're ready to go. And then there's other areas that are just a little far away right now and either need to evolve from a use case standpoint, or we need to see that generative capabilities continue to evolve.
Got it. Got it. And I think just if we look at the current wave of AI, and it's hard sometimes to distinguish what is hype and what is really a disruptive phase in evolution of any industry, right? And Ulf, if we get that perspective from your side in terms of how do companies really distinguish whether this is all this talk around AI, is this hype or is this really a disruptive phase that will genuinely drive business outcomes from organization? I think that is the most pertinent questions that all of us have today in our
Well,
minds.
I think what you used the keyword yourself, outcomes, and I think what everyone needs to focus on right now is not so much the everything that's written and everything we hear, but how can we apply that to real use cases and real business cases and make this valuable? And I think both Adi and Brandon were touching upon what in my mind are sort of the key areas here. One, of course, is the expansion of the scope of what can be automated. And perhaps we didn't talk enough about the higher value use cases you can now address with the modern technology that perhaps you couldn't do even a couple of years ago. So I think that's a trend we're definitely seeing, namely the application of GenAI and generally AI technologies to be decision-making support and decision-making models, and the automation of rather more complex use cases, much more perhaps customer-facing and customer-enhancing and strengthening customer experience. So I think that's very important. But I think it's all about seeing through the blur and understanding how do we drive this to something that can generate value in fast time. I think it was either Brandon or Adi mentioning time to value. I think that's super important and shouldn't be forgotten. The other thing, of course, is that how the technology itself can work with already existing platforms and existing software in the enterprise. Because one thing is certain is that 2 years ago, we didn't know what we're having today, and we don't know today what we're going to have 2 years from now. So there needs to be a fair amount of compatibility and interplay between what is available today and what will be available tomorrow and what was available yesterday. So I think it's all about outcomes and making it work for the enterprise.
Yeah, well said. I think, Wolf, it's really technology is just the enabler, with outcomes is what companies are truly trying to achieve. Avinash, any quick thoughts from your
Yeah.
side on this topic?
So you see, earlier we had information asymmetry. Now I think we have information symmetry. So because it is so symmetric and everyone knows everything else, the net amount of experiments that are happening today are seriously, they have never happened before. And so everyone's trying out everything. And taking the law of averages itself, everything can't succeed. And so there have to be a lot of checks and balances in figuring out what will succeed, what will not succeed. And then as entrepreneurs, as senior execs in large organizations, as board members, then apply the old Fraser of outcome and say, all right, does this make sense? Because otherwise there's no end to the amount of unstructured data that you can process. And this new, as Stephen Wolfram, I ran into him in MIT recently, and he said, this is the new language interface, right? So with the birth of the new language interface, there are any number of use cases that you can give rise to. And over time, they will all come true. But today, where do you focus on? I think the outcome is the right razor, the right lens to apply. There are some low-hanging fruits. I mean, my company, Scan.ai, exists in a space where we use AI to understand execution, right? How business processes are executed, execution visualization, continuous visualization at scale. And now that is giving rise to that same data is giving rise to deeper understanding as to how people work and where do you insert yourself in work, where training is required, and so on and so forth, right? So every company will find its own use cases, but I think every company also needs to be very responsible, and organizations need to be very responsible as to where they put their efforts in this area.
Got it, Avinash. I think yes, certainly. I think finding the right use cases is very important, and I think that's also a good sort of segue into our next topic, where Brandon, I think you touched upon the two broad categories of one accelerating of developer productivity as the big sort of bucket where we are seeing the impact and leverage of generative AI specifically, and the other being on the automation of newer business workflows and newer sort of functional experiences that are emerging. Where do you see the maximum impact today? And then to Avinash's, I think just using that phrase of like, what are the low hanging fruits that companies can go after to start with?
Yeah, so if I may, I'd start with what our customers are doing. So as I mentioned, we've got hundreds of POCs, early pilots that customers are conducting. And we're doing a lot of these in partnership with Google and AWS, but also many of them are also using Microsoft Azure as the underlying generative AI platform. The three categories we are seeing, one is around customer service. Think about the co-pilots. You think about things around entity extraction, say from an email and to process a case. Obviously, summarization. Think about in wealth management, you want to have, before you to go talk to a high net worth client, you want to give a full summary on the potential there, so you have the right conversation with them. But also things like, obviously, constructing the email. So there's a lot of different things you can do as part of the customer service workflows. That's a big one we're seeing. The second round is actually around documents. It's been a lot of use cases out there are obviously structured and unstructured, like POs and financial documents and stuff like that. But what generative AI has really expanded on is unstructured documents. So we just rolled out our document automation now infused with generative AI for documents like logistics, contracts, and resumes, handwritten, all these things that were really hard in the past. And now, it's never going to be 100%, but with 70, 75% accuracy, you can now expand. That's where you're talking about, more use cases out there. So I'd say the first set of use cases we're seeing are around what more can I automate, right? Because then that creates, and there's another one on employee experience, which is the third big category of use cases we're seeing. But that then creates, well, now I have a bigger automation pipeline. So what do I automate? And so for that, to automate those use cases, generative AI also helps, which is around developer productivity. You don't have enough, pro developers. We have always heard about citizen developers that in most cases haven't gone too far because it's been very onerous from a governance perspective. But now with, for example, Automation Anywhere, we think about developer productivity, but with the right governance mindset in place. So you're not just kind of, building stuff and pushing that out of production. As Avinash mentioned and Ulf mentioned, responsible AI is really important in the responsible aspect of it. So that is the other use case, especially with, I'd say, a lot of consulting companies, back office, BPOs. They're really driving hard on how do we accelerate the development of this huge pipeline of automation. So all I'd say is we're seeing both, but it really depends on area, category, even customer, because each customer is not going to be the same. They're going to pick different use cases, ultimately with the goal to go drive business value, but at an accelerated timeline.
Understood. And also, if you had to sort of come in from the world of documents, what is really changing there? And I know, I think you also, from AbbVie's standpoint, look at the whole process intelligence space. What is your?
No, I think this is an enormous opportunity. I mean, at AbbVie, we've been working with language models for many years. We started building our own language model probably 15 years ago, and that's been very tightly implemented through our NLP capabilities. But what GenAI gives us is a different dimension. It gives us a different dimension to enhance on what we already have. And for us, what we have, the way we think about it, the way we try to frame this is purpose-built or purposeful AI. So we will add and enhance and make sure that we can deliver a better user experience to the customers by incorporating the very latest technology and the very latest capabilities. So what I think this will do, and Ari was onto this before, is this will expand the addressable market, if you will, for extracting information, and not only information as words or entities, but also context and how the entities and the context flow together. So it calls for opportunities in more difficult documents, and therefore it opens up opportunities that we couldn't perhaps do only a few years ago. And we see that a lot with our customers as well, as we go deeper and deeper into automation journeys. And the more complex the documents that you come across, the more it calls for modern technology to extract it. And this is exactly where GenAI comes into play.
Got it. And Brandon, I think if you had to touch upon what it really means for the virtual agents, like conversational AI space, because I think that's one area where AI has been used for a number of years. We of course heard it from everyone here on the panel, but what is really the sort of newness that is out there for the conversational AI virtual agent space with generative AI?
Yeah, great question. And in the context of developer productivity versus workflows and user productivity, I actually think it's a bit of a multi-dimensional conversation, because there's value, but there's also risk, and there's also effort, right? And one of the reasons why I think it's so easy to start with developer productivity, and in many cases the right place to start, is because you can leverage generative to ideate and come up with the use cases and build out code, and then you run it through your SDLC. And it has checks and balances, a developer looks at it, there's testing, somebody promotes it, there's rollbacks, right? You have all of these checks and balances coming after that development cycle. So I think that's why you're seeing so much proliferation around the co-pilots and the coding practices that people are doing, because it's relatively low risk. Once we start putting generative, I'm not going to say unmonitored, but customer-facing generative, then you're starting to see architectures and best practices emerge where you have multiple stages of filtering and checks to make sure that there's no hallucination. You're seeing different use cases light up. The lower risk ones typically are around document ingestion and asking questions of a document, right? Because you can really narrow that focus. But for broader applications, that's where these frameworks come into play. That's where you need to make sure that the risk of saying something that's incorrect is mitigated, in whatever that means for the use case, right? So I think when we talk about this, we're really talking about different horizons. And the developer horizon is much closer, much more accessible, far more examples there. That user horizon, and even that administrator horizon that's going to be tuning and making adjustments to the models or to the conversations, we're still on that curve, right? And there's great examples, but we've still got a ways to go before you have some sort of turnkey solution that is a customer-facing generative solution.
I 100% agree with that, and I think everyone is in the industry. We have a lot of responsibility to make sure that we guide our customers in a way that it actually creates value from day one, rather than overarching or overachieving or trying to be super intentional on what you're going to go after. Make sure that it actually works and build from there. So that's very much down to the way we think as well, and I think that was a good point.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing. That's why I think the co-pilots have taken off, whether it's on the end user, business user standpoint, or even the developer. You always want human in the loop. It's going to, I think, be human in the loop or human augmentation for quite some time, till it's never going to be just fire and forget, which is what traditional automation has been in the past. It's always going to be humans need to ultimately be the decision makers, even when you're developing or when you're interacting with it in an application. That's at least what we're seeing.
Got it. Yeah. So I think that human oversight is always required. Yeah, even though you might call it autopilot, but yeah, I think it's more like a co-pilot in most cases.
I
And
think
Avinash,
much
yeah,
more. I
please.
think the human point is much more deeper than just intervention or oversight. I think that it is much deeper in the sense that humans will always choose. Algorithms will decide. So decision is always algorithmic in a certain sense, but ultimately the choice of where to direct the LLM, where to direct a certain capability that you have, that is not going to go away. And so I somehow smiled when people talk of doom and gloom, saying, "Hey, machines are going to take over." Machines are not going to take over simply because we still will choose, and that the choice will always remain with humans, right? So you'll always choose to do this versus that. And so whether it is oversight or whatever else, I'm very optimistic about the merger of human and machine intelligence rather than one taking over the other.
Yeah, we're still ways away from AGI. Still not there yet.
Correct.
Yes, yes, certainly.
But I,
And Avinash,
Pranko, you're going to ask me a question. I made up my own question. Go ahead.
no problem. Yeah, I think on the topic of choices, I think that's where my next question was. On I think it's almost like an AI arms race that is set on with the whole generative AI wave, right? And every platform company out there, every software provider is compelled to sort of get and make an announcement on how they are leveraging generative AI. So I think as a leader of one of the upstart companies in this space, how do you make sure that you're not sort of getting caught on in the race and actually creating differentiated value for customers?
Now, I'll be honest. The I have a customer, the chief data science officer of a very large insurance company, and we were presenting our roadmap on this whole thing. And he actually said to us, and I deeply appreciate him saying that to us. He says that any company that comes to me by starting off its pitch by saying that here's from a generative AI point of view, here's what we do, I immediately lose respect for it. Simply because I am not concerned about whether you use generative AI. Begin with what you're solving for. And if it so happens that you can solve for better because of the presence of generative AI, then so be it. So I think that's one lens that we all need to be very mindful and careful of, that we have to be true to our mission as companies. And then if we find that, yes, our mission can be accelerated, augmented, supercharged with the help of generative AI, then we do it. Now, of course, certain things are common. Every company, from a reporting point of view, now can use generative, right? Because the whole ask answer is now a language interface as opposed to be a reporting interface. So that can be done. We can do developer productivity. You can do certain things are common. But there are certain things that are core to you, and I think it should not fit the square peg in a round hole by saying, well, we will do it by generative. If it helps, so be it. If it does not, then it does not, right? For example, we are now building capabilities that are now allowing organizations to see where in turn, and we observe work, right? So we build models of how work is happening. In fact, we use the same technology that you use inside an LLM to predict the next step in the process, right? So replace the word by process step, and that's how we do it. And we're also now beginning to come out with predictions as to where and how much productivity could you gain if you replaced certain steps by LLMs, right? And so it becomes, the first step is to understand where to act because you know how your people are acting, building a model around that, and then taking it upwards, right? And all companies, whether it is Adi's company or Brandon's company, all companies are at different steps in this step ladder of generative AI. And you have to be very clear what step you are on and what you are looking to do here. I think we will be if we look too much further up or further down below, I don't think we'll be doing the right thing. So every company has its own sweet spot in that sense, and commensurate with its mission.
Yes, yes, yes. Ulf, any comments from your side? How do you make sure that you are not sort of swaying from your roadmap and making sure that you are,
No, I think we've
while
said
at the
it.
same time staying competitive?
I think we've said it. I think it's all about customer outcome. It's all about using and enhancing what we have. I mean, we're not throwing out years and years of technology development. We have, one of the world's best IDP platforms and a very strong challenger in the process intelligence space. So, we know what we're doing. We know what we're good at. But this can make us even better. But we need to be careful to make sure that we don't overpromise and underdeliver. And I think, as Avi said, that ultimately the customer cares for the solution to their problems, and exactly how we do it, they don't care that much. But having said that, and this coming back to what I said in the beginning, I think when all of us are technology partners or technology solution providers to our enterprise customers right now, and whenever they buy something, they need to have that flexibility of being open to technology that we don't know of yet, or will be delivered, or will be available 2 years from now, 3 years from now. So I think it's all about keeping that optionality in your the way you architect your products as well. So that's how we've gone about, and I know most of you others as well gone about it as well, that you can instinctively talk to other business systems and make sure that you are good at what you're doing, but you don't necessarily lock the company in or the enterprise customer into a paradigm that then is very difficult to get out of.
Yeah, if I just want to add one thing, I think going back to the customer outcome aspect of it, we're also looking at like joint solutioning. It's not only about what we create or what Avi creates or whoever creates. It's like how do we joint solution, because it's not any one vendor, right?
Yeah.
If you're doing end-to-end customer service, Genesis is part of it, Salesforce is part of it, AWS is part of it, we might be part of it. Like how do you orchestrate an end-to-end solution? And GenAI in that context is how we're thinking about it. Obviously, we'll have certain solutions that are unique to us, but we need to play well with the end-to-end use case, end-to-end solution.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question to this panel? Have you had customer pushback where customers are paranoid about the lock-in, Wolf, to your point, and they have said, well, let us go slow on this because we're not sure which way this train is moving? Have you had experience of that kind?
Well, if you ask me, I think we're seeing that all the time. It's not about the question of being locked in. It is how do we make sure that we are we have access to modern technology. We need a combination of something that works today, and we need to have something that can help us build for the future as well. So that's incredibly important in every conversation we have with any C-level buyer. It's so we know that in many cases where we sell, there's an automation anywhere or UiPath or an Intex or Salesforce or a lot of other companies will be available and will be part of their overall architecture. So we need to make sure that we can deliver what we do in the best possible way, whilst continuing to speak to all the other systems that they have. So I think that is a big issue. And one more thing perhaps is that I think what I see, and I'm sure the rest of you do the same, when you have these conversations about it's not about selling, it's about how do we partner for the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and they ask us questions, but they also want the possibility to give their input, and that's exactly the way it should be. That iterative process of building roadmaps together and devising the product strategy for the next number of years. Because one thing we know is that we don't know everything.
That is true.
Yeah, interesting. I think one thing customers seem to be concerned about is about the costs associated with generative AI platforms as well, right? And I'm sure, I think, as while you are doing a lot of sort of R&D and trying to bake in these feature sets, capabilities into your platform, it does come at an additional cost, right? So what is the business model that you are seeing around it, right? Like will these additional capabilities mean that customers have to pay extra around it? Maybe Brandon, if you want to touch upon, and I think the overall Amelia platform has gotten upgraded with some of these generative AI capabilities. How are you thinking about that whole business model going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. It's no secret we're in early days when it comes to hardware and capacity. When you have nations buying hundreds of millions of dollars of GPUs, businesses are also looking for what's becoming quite a scarce resource. So the architecture of GPU is very different than CPU, as we know. GPUs don't have the same sort of multi-threaded capability just yet. So concurrency is a real discussion topic if you're going to host your own models. The privacy policies of foundation model providers are a topic if you're going to look elsewhere to use those models, right? So you've got these different options with different cost structures, different SLAs, and different privacy concerns. So I think it's very natural at this stage in the life cycle of a technology to have that diversity in pricing structures. And I think it's really up to us to be transparent, right? If you want to use our internal model, here's what it looks like. Here's the cost. It's real cost, right, at this point in our GPU curve. If you want to use a foundation model outside of us, and there's an API, you can bring your own keys. We can host them for you. We can bake that into our model if you want to do everything on our paper, right? Right now it's that flexibility, and as we move forward, I for sure I think we're going to see a narrowing of those different pricing models. You're going to get some companies that just bake it into a platform fee or bake it into a cost and make those assumptions, because customers are going to want simplicity. They're going to want predictability. They're going to want and companies like ours on this call, we like to be partners for the long run with customers. So we want to have those long-term relationships in which customers can predict their spend and whatnot. So yeah, today, different pricing models as to be expected. And then I think you're going to continue to see convergence as we move forward and hardware costs comes down, the throughput goes up, concurrency goes up, things like this. And you'll see probably more of a commoditization like you see today with hosting.
Yes, certainly. I think the cost will come down, and I think in some sense they have started to come down already. Adi, I think you have a very wide portfolio of products, right? Of course, it's a singular platform, but there are sort of multiple capabilities out there that you take to customers, and all of them have that generative AI component starting to get baked in. So how can customers think about is an updated pricing associated to some of these? How you sort of seeing that evolve?
Yeah, so ultimately pricing should always be aligned to the customer outcomes, or what's the customer ROI, right? So for example, with documents, we look at number of pages, right? And so for that, we're just saying whether some models, for some use cases, you don't want to use generative AI. For some use cases, you might want to use a generative AI models. For some, you want to bring your own, right? And it's the number of pages ultimately we care about. So the idea being with generative AI, even if you use our own kind of the models we provide underneath the covers for, let's say, logistics, others, we're ultimately driving the behavior of more pages that you're automating. So that's kind of how we package in that sense. And so we don't care whether you use generative AI or not generative AI, it's all based on number of pages. The goal that we want you to drive more page consumption. I will say even for our own, and so for other use cases, for example, for our co-pilots, you might bring your own. So in that case, you are bringing your own GenAI, so we don't charge you extra. It's just, it's part of the platform. We want you to see value for the use case. And for a developer, where you're building automations, that's where we have a platform plus consumption, where again, the goal being we want you to build more automations, because that's essentially why we put it there. So as long as it aligns with the goal that you're building more automations, customer wins, we win. And that's kind of aligning the benefits. The one thing I would point out, though, is to your broader question, I think the cost is decreasing. You've already seen it in the last 9 to 12 months. Now, as I mentioned, we are launch partners with both AWS and GCP, and they're also looking at it. I'm sure Microsoft obviously is also looking at it. We also, for our own solutions that are built using GenAI, we do a lot of pre-processing. So you heard terms like RAG and others, vector databases. We do a lot of that stuff before we use the generative AI model itself. So it's not that for every input we are calling the underlying LLM that we might be using. So there are a lot of things that I think all of us are doing as we're building these solutions to optimize for that cost, and obviously aligning that cost is one aspect of it, but aligning the packaging to the benefit accrued to the customer, because that's essentially what they'll buy. They're not going to pay for the cost of the LLM, really.
Got it. And I think overall, we did touch upon some functions. I think I know one of you spoke about customer service being one area where we could see a lot of disruption. Ulf, any comments from your side on what functions and use cases do you think will actually get the most sort of disrupted or get more customers can expect most value in as
Yeah.
they think about the
No, it's probably a question we could spend the next 40 minutes on. But look, I think I would summarize it in the following way. I think you have the existing use cases, where we can drive better performance and better accuracy, and we will have to because everyone else will. So that means better outcomes for our customers. Are coming back to the pricing as well. We price per page, and it's what's closely related to the value for the customer. But that's one area. The other area is where you're expanding the use cases into areas where we couldn't really do much in the past, or it's not as much as we would have liked to. And I think there's a lot of value in healthcare, where you have a lot of rather complex documents, both in terms of understanding processes and the documents that are part of these processes. I think when it comes to decision-making support, and clearly, summarization, as we talked about, getting the gist and the context of complex documents and how to automate that. I don't think, however, that is so much automating repetitive tasks. It's actually higher value tasks that you then automate, and typically for a decision-making model. So I think that's what we're going to see a lot going forward. But as I said, I think it's going to be a little of everything, because the capabilities will both deepen and broaden.
Got it. And Avinash, from a process intelligence standpoint, are there newer problems you're able to solve, or newer sort of functions that you're able to get insight into, which wasn't really possible earlier?
Absolutely.
How can
I think
companies think about that
there's
future?
something fundamental happening here, in the sense that, you see, when you bring a foundational LM, it has been trained on the totality of human text, right? And so it has a world knowledge. But when you bring that same LLM into your enterprise and ask it to weigh in on let's say, a claims process that you might be running, or an account opening, or an AML process that you're running, it actually does not have any understanding of the way in which your people run certain things. So process intelligence, in that sense, the first part of process intelligence is to capture data and understand, now becomes the first stepping stone towards building foundational models that are custom to you, or chaining models that are custom to you with outside foundational models. So in that sense, one big use case that is emerging, and across, whether it is Scan or other companies, I think is going to happen, that you would need to understand and model work in LLM space based on the work that your organization does. Only then can you get more fundamental answers. And this is not one company's job, right? This is across the board, across functions, and so on and so forth. So the emergence of the model of work can truly now begin to happen.
I think that's a great point. I think what we're beginning to see is that there's a number of large providers of LLMs, but whenever they are going to be used in another context, there has to be specific training for that context, and that's where we're seeing use cases for us as well, actually, in terms of extracting information from documents that are specific to those use cases. So that's a whole new area, and I think you're absolutely right.
Excellent. And I think while there are, of course, these newer possibilities that are emerging, are there newer talent or skill set requirements as well that companies will have to really take the full benefit of these technologies? And how are you supporting in those early days of this technology coming in? How are you supporting your customers sort of make sure that they are getting the outcomes that are possible today, right? So maybe if Brandon, you want to take a step at this.
Sure. I think we can look back to history and see a couple examples of the curve that we're on, right? If you look at the proliferation of analytics and Tableau and all Power BI and all these tools coming on board, everybody can be an analyst. And then you look at it objectively and you say, well, everybody can be an analyst, but having data literacy really helps, right? Like knowing data structures and how to roll things up, right? I think we're going to see the same thing with generative. Everybody's going to be able to use generative and connect to a model, but understanding the principles of grounding and tuning and these things helps, right? It'll help you get more out of those models, and it'll make sometimes the difference between using a generic foundation model that you're going to do some grounding in order to get it more relevant to your organization, or going and buying, subscribing to a very vertical specific model that has a lot of that language trained in. And these are the decisions that we'll have to make as partners to our customers. And our customers will have to make those same decisions looking at what they want to invest in. Do they want to have that generative literacy, if you will? Do they want to outsource that? Do they want to rely on a trusted partner? But I think just like analytics, just like low code development, you're going to see more and more customers having that understanding, having that literacy. And at the very minimum is they'll expect you to be able to answer those questions. And then the maximum will be they're making build buy decisions themselves. They may just do something on their own. So we have to provide incremental value as partners, as vendors, in order to help them in their journey.
Got it. And then finally, maybe I think Ulf, we can take that question to you. The concerns around data privacy, ethics, hallucinations, a lot of these cautionary terms that enterprises use, right, when they think about generative AI. What is your response to them? How can companies really sort of work through these concerns and make sure they're getting value out of the
Yeah, well, I think it's just an ethical framework of developing with AI. It's certifications. It's making sure that you're completely transparent with everything you do and everything is open. I mean, we have an ML framework that we made available a few years ago called NeoML, and so I think it's if you as a developer have in your cultural DNA that you are open, transparent, and you are also living by the rules, and not only necessarily the rules that are written, but also the unwritten rules, I think you're bound to do the right thing. And whenever you have a question, you make sure that you engage with specialists, whether there's a legal specialist or AI ethics specialist. We have one on board actually at Abby called Andrew Perry, who's been working with this for many years and who's been very helpful in guiding us from time to time. So I think it's a super important responsibility that we all have. But I think those who develop the large models have that even more than the companies on this panel have. So, but it is important.
I think you said the right thing. I was going to put a layer on top of your answer. I said this is a bigger question, much bigger question.
Yeah.
It does not stop at our level. It stops. It goes right up to as societies.
Yes.
What do we want these LLMs to do, right? And what is the harm and the good that can come out of them? So governments are worried about this we are worried, of course, but it's at government level and society level that we are worried about this issue.
Well, we see what's happening in social media networks. So
yes, absolutely.
I think one change though with generative AI, it has put in the hands of a broader spectrum of folks versus the traditional AI. Like in traditional AI, like the stuff we had, it wasn't that everybody was using it. It was very much you had to be a developer, right? And we wouldn't give to a citizen developer to go say, hey, go build a data model. It's not something you're gonna do. So I think there is questions on, okay, what are your guardrails? What are the guidelines of use? That's why we have lots of POCs. We don't have, and that's why I think the developer use cases are far more prevalent because that's more controlled. And ultimately, you're not going to push something in production till it goes through the standards, right? So there are guardrails versus putting it in front of the end user. But we're also, our core audience ultimately are kind of more the business developers, not actually the hardcore core developers, because there you can, there are a lot of things you can do. Putting in things like, prompt templates, prompt tuning, monitoring, an audit, like alerts and notifications on if you're using PII data. So you also have to put some product stuff, but there's also needs to be broader guardrails in place. And some of that is also through training, through learning. There are a lot of different things, there are a lot of different ways you need to attack it versus just product. Product is just one piece of it.
Yeah.
Obviously, the foundational model providers have a bigger say because the question is how much of the data are you using to train the model, which it's surprising how most folks don't even know that even the business data is not being used to train the underlying foundational model. That itself is confusion for most people, right? The fact that it's kind of inference only, it's not training, which is the first step to making sure people understand how it's being used.
If we had a good answer to this question, all of us combined, someone would not have lost their job and regained it again in the matter of days. Because it's a very hairy problem, no doubt about it.
Yeah. No, I think, and as some of you said it, you need those guardrails and governance frameworks at every level, right? Whether for developers, for users, even for organizations, right? I think those frameworks are to be defined well and to be able to make sure that you're solving for that problem. Thanks everyone. Unfortunately, we are at the end of time, and I really enjoyed the conversation. It's a new and exciting topic, and I think all of you being the industry leaders, taking it right to the next level is what is clearly visible, and the potential for automation and the confluence of generative AI with the various technologies, including document processing, process intelligent, conversational AI, I think RPA, all are clearly visible. And I think then there are possibilities that enterprises only have to unlock and get benefits out of, while making sure, of course, that they are sticking to those guardrails as we called out. So thanks again, everyone. And over to you, Riddhi.